Over the last couple of days, we've gotten some very interesting roller coaster announcements from Saudi Arabia. These are some of the craziest roller coasters we've ever seen. In this video, I'll break both of these announcements down on Falcon's flight and Transformers more than meets the eye. Both of these coasters just look absolutely bonkers, so there's a lot to talk about. I'll start with Falcon's flight before moving on to Transformers. So let's talk about the former for a few minutes. This coaster was basically originally announced in 2019, but I, along with many others, was very skeptical about the whole project. To be frank, the coaster seemed too big. It seemed like something a 7-year-old would build on Planet Coaster, and not something that would actually go into a real amusement park. The part where the coaster went straight up the side of a mountain was especially suspicious to most. That didn't seem possible. And to be honest, while Falcon's flight seemed a little bit suspicious, the whole Six Flags Qiddiya project was an interesting one because they opened up with incredible looking concept art, but sometimes concept art does not always live up to reality, as we know. Like the Park Star coaster, it all looked too big, it all looked too ambitious, it all looked, quite frankly, it didn't look possible. But here we are, November of 2023, this project has been going up, construction has been happening, and now we have yet another announcement for Falcon's flight, and it really looks like this park and this coaster is actually happening. So with all that being said, let's talk about the unbelievable scale of Falcon's flight. This coaster, which of course is built by Intamin, will be 639 feet tall at its top elevation because of that mountain. The current record holder is 183 feet shorter in King Dakar. Its speed will be 155 miles an hour, which is actually only 6 miles an hour faster than the current record holder, Formula Rossa. I thought it would be a little bit faster than that given its height. Its length will be 13,943 feet. This is just ridiculous. The current record holder, Steel Dragon 2000, is now beaten by over a mile. These now are crazy numbers that we're talking about with Falcon's flight. But just because a coaster is big doesn't necessarily mean it's one of the best in the world. So let's talk about some of the elements. This looks like a pretty solid layout from Intamin, focusing on a lot of speed, a lot of drops, and it appears a lot of airtime. The first part is going to be the appetizer, so to speak. You have a nice looking drop that twists to the left, you have a couple of airtime hills, and what looks like possibly a wave turn. Of course though, you're building up for that moment where you go up the mountain. That's going to be a very long LSM launch, uphill no less. When you get to the top of the mountain, it gives you an opportunity to rethink some of your life choices. Going over the edge, it looks like at one point. So I really like what they did there, making everyone freak out at the top of that thing. This is almost reminiscent of when Iron Rattler goes on top of the Quarry Wall at Six Flags Fiesta Texas, just a lot bigger. You then approach what's gotta be one of the best coaster drops in the entire world. 500 feet straight down the side of a mountain over 150 miles an hour. Now, a note about that tunnel is that is slightly modified from the original animation. As you see in the first animation, that tunnel goes through the mountain, and in the newer animation, it's simply on top of the mountain. This makes a lot of sense because I imagine the logistics of the former would be ridiculous. Next, you go over one of the biggest camelback airtime hills on the planet. I actually don't know how tall this thing is, but it could be Hyper and Giga Coaster heights. It's just ridiculous. After that giant hill, you have a couple more hills, some speed, and an overbank into the brakes. The ending here really allows you to appreciate your speed, and it also helps burn off the speed as well, so I think I like that part. One of the things that didn't make it from the original animation into the new animation is some of the ending elements. If you take a look at the old one, you can see that they were planning one, possibly two inversions at the end of the coaster. Those elements have since been replaced with that overbank turn that I mentioned earlier, and I think that's fine because you're going to have so much speed regardless that an overbank will still be really enjoyable. Another thing to note besides the layout is the fact that this will be the world's first exocoaster. If you're asking the question, what's an exocoaster? It's a coaster that has a height of 600 feet. Which is kind of humorous because we just skipped over 500 feet. Intamin went from 400 to 600 feet. I'm not sure if we'll get a 500 foot coaster anytime soon. Maybe an RMC T-Rex? I don't know, we'll see. The trains were actually just revealed at IAAPA, and man oh man, they look fantastic. And additionally, there are some interesting features to note. Number one, you will not have to wear safety goggles like you do on Formula Rossa while you're riding this coaster, which I think is neat. According to the people involved, they've done extensive testing on these trains to make sure that it's going to be safe for people when they go out to ride Falcon's flight. Things like the wheel temperature, things like the shield in front of the riders, all of that type of stuff. They've been testing it, and the trains look fantastic also. The lap bars are also per usual for 2023 Intamin, and those are loved by most coaster enthusiasts. Between those trains and the sheer size of his coaster, it's going to look incredible, there's no doubt. So comment down below, is this going to become the world's best roller coaster? With that, let's move on to the other major announcement we've gotten recently from Saudi Arabia, and that is we finally have a first SNS access coaster. To provide a little bit of context, this concept was released a couple of years ago by SNS Worldwide, and it's a concept that has so much potential with the cars having the ability to rotate around the track. It's really creative. They built a small prototype at their headquarters in Utah, and I've heard great reviews about that small coaster. According to people that have ridden it, it's tough to put this experience into words, and it's easy to see why. No other model does what this model has the ability to do, and that's why there's so much potential with it. From the theming and layout perspective, there's so much you can do. It's a really exciting model. Now, the first one we're getting isn't necessarily super big, which isn't really terribly surprising, but I still think it will be a great coaster. This coaster, along with the park it's opening at, will open in 2025, and it's currently under construction. We don't know a whole lot about this coaster right now from a stats perspective. We do know a couple of things though. Number one, it'll have a 35-mile-an-hour launch. Number two, those seats will of course rotate 360 degrees. And number three, it has 2 inversions. Also, it looks like every time you ride, there's going to be 2 cycles, which is pretty cool. This coaster looks to be crammed into a pretty tight space, and it's not very big. But I think those sensations, and hopefully some theming touches as we see here in the animation, are going to make this a really fun ride. It's tough to describe these elements because this is a coaster that is just tough to describe in general. This is definitely a prototype, and this is going to be a test for SNS. If this ride is successful and it has somewhat limited technical issues, other people are going to start buying bigger models from them. Because of that, it's imperative that this coaster runs somewhat smoothly from an operations standpoint, because that's what the other parks are going to be looking at. So with all of that being said, comment below, do you think this is going to live up to its potential, or do you think this is going to be one of those models that's one and done? Let me know down in the comments. And what do you think in general? These 2 coaster announcements from Saudi Arabia are incredible, and it's a big step for roller coaster development. And until next time, thank you all for watching. See you then.